Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the room. Welcome to the September meeting of Flourishing Network. As ever, we have a ritual with this. It's a one-word check-in in the chat. What's your state of mind today? How are you doing today? What's the first word that comes to mind when when I ask what your state of mind is? Are you feeling happy, jubilant, grateful? Are you feeling a bit exhausted? What is it? Please type in the chat. We'd love to get a sense of the vibe of the room before we kick off today. Just yes from Jim. Love that. Anticipatory, curious, vibrant, wonderful for everyone. Wonderful. That's the first word that comes to mind for me. Inspired, fantastic. Hey. All right, so a very special meeting for you all today. I'll come back to some of these one-word checks in a moment, although I should mention Mooney. Yeah, that's fantastic. Delighted to introduce two senior fellows of the Human Flourishing Programme's Flourishing Network, who will lead this meeting, my good friends, Emmie Bidston and Dr. Katy Granville-Chapman. They, in addition to being senior fellows of the Flourishing Network, are co-chairs of the Leadership Flourishing Interest Group and research fellows at the Oxford Character Project. And today they're going to lead a discussion model to help leaders empower flourishing within their own contexts. There's several speakers in addition to both of them whom they will introduce. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over very capable hands of Katy and Emmie. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, John. It's absolutely fantastic to be with everyone. Emmie, do you want to take over because I've got an echo?
Yeah, Katy, I think we may just need people to mute, that's all. I think you might be fine now. Try again.
How is that? How's the tech, everyone? Is that sounding okay? Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much. Yeah, really, really fantastic to be here. It's been the greatest joy and privilege to be part of the Human Flourishing Programme network. Goodness me, have we had some adventures and some phenomenally joyful moments, and some of the friendships that we've made we couldn't be more grateful for. And we're really thrilled that some of our friends are actually on this call and are going to be supporting us today and presenting as well, which is really, really exciting. Emmie, over to you for a sec.
Yeah, I'd just echo that point, Katy. I don't know if some of you would have been involved for the last couple of years since this started, and some maybe have just joined the network. But for us, we have met incredible people, and the things that have kind of bounced out from this network have been wonderful. So we've been running the Leadership for Flourishing group as part of this for about 2 years now, and we've ended up with kind of a website and a conference, and there's kind of research papers coming out, and a book we'll talk about later, and more importantly, really powerful friendships and relationships that are helping us flourish and rippling out into the world, hopefully. And so we're going to tell you some of those stories today and mention and point you to research, and just hope that this will then ripple out to you and have even more impact. So you're lots of different people in our group, but Katy, back to you.
Oh, thanks, Emmie. Yeah, so super excited about the book. That's something that's come out from our group, and just about all of the chapter authors, and there are quite a lot of chapters, are all from members of the Leadership for Flourishing group. And with huge gratitude to Jim Ritchie-Durham, who's on the call and is going to be speaking to you a bit later, we managed to get a contract with Oxford University Press. So hopefully the importance of Leadership for Flourishing will get out even further, which we're thrilled about. Another activity that's been particularly exciting, which maybe Jim will tell you more about because he's been involved in it, is work with the UN, particularly UNESCO, and the idea of a Global Flourishing Day and Global Flourishing Goals instead of UN SDGs when they run out in a few years' time. So perhaps Jim will tell you a little bit more about that because he's been on those special interest groups. But Emmie and I thought it'd be really nice just to tell you a little bit about why we're so passionate specifically about leadership for flourishing and the importance of leadership practices, behaviours, systems for empowering flourishing of both people and, of course, the planet as well. So one thing Emmie and I kind of started off with, and I will just get this going here. fingers crossed the tech will work. This is really not, there we go. Was thinking about the idea that we really, really believe profoundly that leaders can improve lives. So Emmie, do you want to say a bit more about Know, Love and Inspire?
Yeah, so Katy and I are kind of both involved in research in terms of flourishing, but also in terms of practice on the ground. We've got a varied background. Katy has worked in all sorts of places, including in the military in the UK. I've worked in the government in the UK. And throughout kind of all our experiences, we just saw the difference that good leadership can make and the difference that bad leadership can make and the huge impact it has on the flourishing of those around. So we wanted to kind of pull together both our experiences, but more importantly as well, just all the research. And Katy had done her PhD at Oxford University on this topic of leadership for flourishing, and just see what does this look like on the ground, and how can we take all the many amazing bits of research being done about both leadership and flourishing and kind of join them together in a way that empowers people on the ground who might not have the time that we all have to be investigating and researching this. So we wanted to produce a really kind of practical but inspiring kind of toolkit that, you know, a busy nurse or a busy teacher could use and implement. And the framework we came up with was the idea that for leaders to lead for flourishing, they need to know themselves and the people they need, love them and inspire them. So know, love and inspire your people. And so we pulled these three together with lots of different research, lots of different kind of case studies, stories that would hopefully be memorable from real life, and kind of practical kind of toolkit as well for leaders to kind of try out and put into practice.
Oh, thanks so much, Emmie. And it was the most fun adventure as well to be able to do it together. So if you're thinking about writing a book, I would recommend do it with your best friends. It's amazing. So just to emphasize the importance of leadership for flourishing, this was a particularly interesting piece of research just because of the scale of it. So as you can see, if you look really closely, there were 27,732 respondents, which is not as many respondents as Jim Ritchie-Durham has for his, but enough to make it quite an interesting piece of research. And McKinsey picked up on it and actually put it into a report called The Boss Factor, but it was actually led by Jan-Emmanuel Deneuve, who's the director of the Oxford University Wellbeing Research Centre. And the key findings were relationships with management are the top factor in employees' job satisfaction, which in turn is the second most important determinant of employees' overall well-being. Only mental health is more important for overall life satisfaction. And this particular piece of research has been particularly encouraging for us because sometimes it's quite difficult for leaders who are under so much pressure and so much stress to actually focus on the well-being of their people and really think about the extent to which their decisions, their actions, their behaviors really make a huge, huge difference in people's lives. And because it was picked up by McKinsey, a lot of the kind of more hard-nosed, competitive type industries have been more convinced. So that was really, really helpful in terms of leadership for flourishing. But Emmie, do you want to do some questions with people? Because we don't want to take too long and we want to definitely give our speakers plenty of time and a bit of time for Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we introduce some other amazing people to talk to you on this topic, we wanted to be a little bit interactive on these kind of themes of kind of knowing, loving and inspiring people and how that creates flourishing. So we'd love all of you to think of a time when a leader knew you really well. What did they do and what was the impact? This is going to be a quick kind of 1 minute exercise. Put something in the chat for us and we will read them out. So a time when a leader knew you really well. What did they do and what was the impact of their knowledge of you and their team? And while you're thinking about that and putting things in the chat, I'm also going to just tell you that we've kind of taken this research and worked with some amazing people, particularly Matt Lee, who runs this, and Ed Brooks, the Oxford Character Project, and turned it into an online course, really underpinning it by some of the work on character and virtue, and I'm hoping it will be released soon, definitely before Christmas. as a free online course that can really help leaders across the world, with a particular aim at the global south. And we've got a really kind of incredible, diverse group of contributors to that course. So we're trying to take this whole idea about leadership for flourishing and really put it out there in the world in a way that will make a difference to people's lives. And it's exciting. We're just reading some of these chats to see how great leadership really can make a difference. A lovely one here about being at a crossroads in a career, and the leader really being flexible and giving that kind of freedom for you to do both. That's so exciting. Great there from Jim, a leader who asked and listened with curiosity and respect. Fantastic. Someone who worked with you and exploded in terms of happiness, satisfaction, productivity. I love that idea that actually someone who works with you actually makes you explode. Thanks, Eri.
I love from Wendy the idea of understanding how to recognize good work, public versus private versus affirmation, because we know that gratitude is so profoundly important for flourishing, particularly for the receiver and also for the giver. But sometimes it's really hard to know how to give gratitude. So actually really understanding how people would like to be affirmed, how people would like to be thanked, can make a massive difference. So thank you so much for that, Wendy.
And this is beautiful here. This leader saw something I could not see and found language that I could hear in order to see it. I think that's amazing. That thank you, Matt. And you talk about sometimes about living in the subjunctive and seeing people for who they are and who they could become as well. And we can't always see that in ourselves. To have a leader who knows who you are and maybe who you're becoming too, and helps you find the language is amazing. I love that. We would love to read them all out, but we're going to move on to the next question only because we are keen to make sure we have time for everyone in this meeting. So next up, if you could change the slide, Katy. So we need to be known in order to be loved. But if you could now try and think of a time when a leader loved you well, what did they do or what was the impact? So similar question, this time when a leader loves you well. And obviously loving comes from knowing, and they're so intertwined. I'm going to read this one. This is lovely. My current boss is so empathetic and knows me well. She stopped me one day after I came back from maternity leave and she told me that my family was the most important thing right now and not to stress about work. She saw through my unspoken stress of learning mum life balance and she gave me leeway, grace and encouragement. That is so lovely to read. And many of us know that challenge of holding a new family with a career. And I love that those words of grace and encouragement. That's such a beautiful example of love that's shown. Thank you for sharing.
I love this from Steve as well. Love is a rare gift because it's willing the good of another. And I think that's so powerful and so much about what flourishing is about, really willing the good or willing the flourishing of another. Yeah, beautifully put. Thank you.
And I love this from John, that because it emphasizes that he taught to me every day. So that kind of relationship, we know leadership is relational, about the job, but also personally, but also asked advice. And I think that kind of giving the other person dignity, because we know that they also know things we don't know and bring things we don't have, rather than it being kind of top down, is again another really powerful way to show love. Other great words like empowering and recognition and appreciation.
Yeah, and holding you in very high esteem and acknowledging gifts and talents. I love that, the idea that everybody has so much to offer and so many gifts and so many talents, and it's just for us as leaders really to see that and help the person to see that too, to enable them to flourish and be at their very best and be the people that they really want to be.
Yeah, agency, dignity, seeing, listening, really beautiful words. Thank you so much, everyone. Katy, have we got time for one more question, or do you think we should move on to make sure we don't run out of time?
I think let's do the last one very, very briefly.
Perfect.
And then we will hand on to Jim and then to John and Simon, which is very exciting.
So our final question then is, think of a time when a leader inspired you. And again, what did they do and what was the impact? I like this from Steve about painting a picture of a future where everyone benefited. I think you're so right, Steve. There's something very visual, isn't there, about inspiration, where it is a picture that we can actually see. I like the way Emmie builds on that seeing theme, but with wise souls that help us see deeper within and without. That there's something about inspiration that is both internal and external.
Beautiful from Karen about found something about all team members to celebrate. Humans are so beautiful. They're such wonderful, wonderful things and manifestations, and there's such unity in all of us and in love, and where we can really find out what it is that we can celebrate about each other. That can be incredibly inspiring.
Yeah. And leaders who live what they teach, there's something about the kind of what we role model, isn't there? That and seeing that authenticity that can be, again, incredibly inspiring. And Katy and I were talking to John Beale on his amazing podcast about this whole theme of authenticity. So thank you so much, everyone. So we couldn't read all these out. We would love to spend the whole evening discussing this, but we have some incredible people here and we want to make sure we give time to them. And for those of you who carefully read John's fantastic emails, you may notice we're going to go possibly in a slightly different order and slightly different people to the original plan, because people have been going all over the world, and a few people are moving house and on planes. But Cath Bishop, we're hoping, I can see her name there, is in an airport currently, traveling the world to somewhere very exciting, and was hopefully going to pop on and say a quick hello if the Wi-Fi is good enough. So Cath, how are you doing? Is your Wi-Fi good enough where you are? Do you want to say hello?
Does that work? It's a really, yeah, I'm not in the quietest of place really. So I'm loving listening to those questions. And yeah, I mean, I guess, shall I just do 2 minutes or something?
That would be amazing, Cath. If you could only give us 2 minutes on Leadership for Flourishing.
Well, I don't know about that,
wisdom.
but I mean, just really about the work that I do around culture, particularly in sport, where flourishing is just not part of the traditional narrative at all. Quite the opposite is pain and sacrifice. And all those sorts of things. So as well as working across the business world and wider organisational world, I do a lot of work in sport to really challenge this narrative that has to be all about pain and sacrifice and suffering, and sort of open up a world where actually athletes can find more joy without feeling guilty about it. And it's quite a sort of challenge to the prevailing culture, but it's enormously just sort of opens up a whole world really. I mean, sport could do so much for society, and largely it's gone in a direction where it minimises its impact and even damages people. And so I feel very passionately about trying to play a role with others in showing actually a different side of sport and its potential.
That's amazing, Cath. And obviously you've done some incredible work with lots of different teams. The one I was reading about recently was with the cricket team. And if you were going to give leaders any advice, leaders who would like to change a harsh culture so that people flourish more, what advice would you give them, Cath?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I actually do quite a lot of work with gymnastics, which of course across the British gymnastics, and that's of course been something that across the world has been a particular sort of an extreme point of where sport can lead to a terrible suffering and nobody notices for decades. And actually now working with leaders who want change, who see the need for it. We have lots of evidence for it. It's still really hard to do because systems sort of just perpetuate themselves and people don't notice the human side. They're so busy focusing on activity and how much training has been done or how many people are members. And so I think it's, you know, it's the same in any organization. It's a shift for the leader to be not measuring activity, but measuring human impact. And that's a lot of what I'm all the time reminding and thinking about. Look, you've been really busy doing all this stuff, but how's that affected a gymnast or a parent or a volunteer or a coach? And it's the same, I think, for all of our organisations, for leaders to start measuring. We have to measure everything, but be really thinking all the time in terms of human impact inside the organisation, outside the organisation, as a real shift to a more flourishing environment.
That's amazing, Cath. Thank you so much. Katy, have you got a question for Cath?
Well, I'm just going to tell everyone, please read Cath's book, particularly if you've got any interest, even the slightest interest in sport, called The Long Win. It's absolutely fantastic and incredibly helpful. If anyone's got children working in education, it's so relevant to all of us and so relevant beyond sport, as well, as you can hear from what Cath is saying. Cath, what's been your biggest win in your work with sports teams recently? What's been the big...
I mean, one of the angles that I use in the long run in my work is to think about what does success look like. If we change our picture of what success looks like, then we do different things. So if success is just a moment in time, crossing a line or getting your business results or getting your exam results, then that leads us down a certain direction. And so the angle I often come in on is thinking about, actually, we could be more ambitious than this, than just winning medals or just getting profit figures up or just getting, you know, 9s or A's or whatever the exam system. Actually, we ought to be describing success in a much longer term way, thinking about the human experience, so the flourishing element of it. What are the lasting gains from whatever it is that we initially think success is? And so again, yeah, all of my work, whether it's in education, sport, business, is about, you know, tends to go in on this. Hang on a minute, we think we all understand what success looks like, but it's often a very narrow temporary view, and we could be more ambitious. So this is actually not about sort of somehow going soft. It's actually the opposite. It's thinking though much more long term, much more about the sort of lasting human impact of what we do when we hit whatever targets we might think we should be aiming for.
Oh, I think that's so powerful. Thank you, Cath. I think the idea of it actually being much more ambitious to empower flourishing, rather than just try and tick metric boxes like gold medals, like exam grades, like profit. It's actually much more complicated, takes much more thought, and actually it takes a huge amount of courage and vulnerability to do it as well. So there's nothing soft about empowering flourishing.
Exactly, and it is a real challenge to metrics. Metrics is often sort of where you really hit the road, or where the rubber hits the road, or whatever the phrase is, because you find you're measuring something that doesn't tell you anything about flourishing or human impact. And that in itself says a lot. That's saying you don't care about this stuff. And if you think you now do want to care about this stuff, you have to really shift not just what the metrics are, but sort of how you're collecting now some different sorts of information. So I find myself having a lot of conversations around metrics, but in a sort of trying to create much more meaningful metrics, thinking about actually the value in the way we measure it. It isn't the outcome, actually. It's often finding out, it's the stories, isn't it? Again, as we always work with stories of flourishing, it's how do we uncover those and understand those, and understand also there's no perfect story in this either. So we're not looking for a sort of high score. We've got to sort of change our thinking.
Absolutely, and yeah, so grateful to your work on that, and so grateful to the Global Flourishing Study as well, and all the work Matt and the team at Beale and Harvard are doing, particularly on measurement, because I think that's really helps so many of us out, and with his frameworks, which hopefully he'll tell us about as well. And yeah, but Cath, thank you so much. Really fantastic to have you on the call with us, and super safe flight. Are you heading to Singapore?
Yes.
Awesome. Have a brilliant trip and hopefully catch up soon. Massive thanks.
Thank you. No,
again.
Great to be here with you all.
And that's a great segue over to Jim. and his amazing work on metrics.
Yeah, so Jim also, like Cath, has written an absolutely brilliant book that we couldn't recommend more, highly economics, the science of abundance. And Jim, I'm hoping you're going to describe some of the data that you're collecting, some of the data that you're working with, and some of the projects that you're on, so we can really appreciate the efforts that you're making to make it easier for all of us to pursue leadership for flourishing. And yeah, couldn't be more thrilled to have the opportunity to work closely with Jim on a book and some papers as well. So brilliant. Over to you, Jim. Thank you.
Wonderful. It's great to be with you all. I was going to share my screen. Does it say leadership for flourishing on the top? Good. Good.
Yeah.
So looking around the room, it's amazing because this work that I'll be sharing briefly is deeply inspired by and in collaboration with many of the folks on this call. So at least a dozen plus of you on this call are deeply inspiring and collaborating with us on this. So the question that I'll share a little bit in 7 or 8 minutes about some of the broader things that Katy was talking about that we're also doing to invite you into. What I was invited to talk about briefly is in Leadership for Flourishing, what is some of the evidence that we're seeing across the globe, and how am I approaching doing that? And so would like to share an idea that's coming out of some work, and I include the sources down on the bottom of places to look a little deeper into this. But what are we measuring and saying leadership for flourishing, how would we know? So exactly what Cath was just talking about. What does flourishing look like? What is the process? And what are ways that we can get into what are we looking at? So we'll start with the principle of, and so I've been bringing in some measurement ideas and working with some organizations, and that's what I'll share right now. Trying to make this practical for organizations to see how are they defining success, as Cath was just talking about in a book I highly recommend as well. So if we take flourishing from Tyler's work, and then the rest of us working on it as whole human well-being, then how do we start to translate that into terms that might work for an organization to start thinking as well, or leadership? And with Matt, we've come to this term ecosystem-wide flourishing. And the idea here is, can we start to assess whether the ecosystem of stakeholders, the people that we're interacting with, are better off because we're here? So is there greater flourishing because of the interactions with us, or is there extraction and they're worse off? And to start with that, we can say, well, we do know how to assess subjective well-being or subjective measures that have been developed. There are all kinds of problems, which many of you in this call have been exploring, of measuring subjective things, but we can start to get with people and ask about their experience. How is this going for you? And their objective health, or what we call administrative data. So what are the measures of outputs of activities and financial outcomes and those things? So we can start to put these two together, the experience and the outputs or outcomes of what they're doing. But we can also do that based on these dimensions of flourishing that the Human Flourishing Program is saying. This isn't complete. That doesn't mean that these are the only dimensions of whole human well-being, but these are a good set to start with, that we can all agree on, that there's a physical component, a social component, a mental component, and a spiritual or moral component of human flourishing. So what we wanted to start playing with, or have been developing, is what if we could ask them, how are you doing now? So I'm calling this in the upper left of this diagram on total value generated. What is the health that you have now, using some of these flourishing measures, using other well-being measures, looking at specific, also physical, mental, social, spiritual other indicators of your health, but how are you doing on all of those dimensions? One. And then the second part, what are the capacities that you have to continue to develop, to continue to generate that well-being? So we're starting to look at how well are you doing now, and do you have the capacity within yourself and your organization, your team, your community, to be able to generate that again? So how healthy are you now and towards the future? A way that we're starting to put that into practice is on the right. We call that total value generated. And here there are two very basic ideas. One is starting to look at your ecosystem of stakeholders. So who are the people that you interact with towards the purpose, achieving the purpose that you've set for yourself or your community? And asking them, so not assuming that you know for them what they care about or what value means to them, but what is it that they determine is of value to them? And here we're using value because that seems to work in organizational context these days. But the idea of value and values and blending those together. But the idea, so for example, and this is some that I'll talk about in a second with a microfinance bank that we're working with, a large bank, is to say, okay, for your customers, how do they determine their experience of interacting with you and in their lives? And are they better off in that experience? Are they flourishing in that experience of life with you and in their environments because of that interaction with you? And what are the direct impacts or the administrative or observable objective impacts or health value that they perceive also? So in other words, are they, if it's a bank and it's a microloan, it's not that you gave them more money, but are they generating more money? So they have more stable and net income. But on the experiential side, do they experience more self-empowerment for herself, for her community, for her family? But doing the same for them with their collaborators or the employees. Or do they have more stable income is one indicator above local market rates of what they could earn, but also how do they feel about themselves and thriving at work and in their families and whatnot. So it's starting to bring out others and ask them what they perceive to be these values in the subjective and objective and putting those together. The second key piece here is that circle, that red circle. So it's not that we're starting from zero, it's where are they starting from now? And so we also call that a baseline, but where are you compared to interacting with somebody else? So the question isn't that are you better off because something exists, rather are you better off in the interactions with us? Does it lead to greater flourishing? So what would, for the example with the employee or the collaborator, it's that they're generating more income for themselves in that objective or observable part than they would doing something else. So it's not that $17 an hour is greater than zero, it's greater than what you would do with your own skill set elsewhere. So in this diagram, I have it drawn in green for the specific project we were working with. But if it were in red, it would be inside that circle to say, I'm actually worse off because of this interaction with you on these dimensions. And what that allows us to start seeing is are there some groups that are green, such as the investor, because the clients or the customers are in red, meaning that we're extracting value from them? Or if everything is in green, it's because everything is positive value is being generated for everybody in their experience and outcomes because of their interactions with each other. So the challenge here is starting to get organizations, as Cath was defining, to start asking these questions. Who are our stakeholders? Who are the people that we interact with that we influence and influence us? And how do they define? So in process with them, how would they define what they value in their experiences and in their outcomes or their outputs and their activities? And are they better off or worse off because of their interactions with us versus who they were interacting with before or would interact if not with us? So it's starting to put all of that and trying to put that together into one equation. And so what have we started to find? Initial findings, we've been very fortunate. We're to have quite a bit of data on this now. And we're looking mostly at what we call the organizational and individual level, so the meso and micro level. And our survey has been applied in 126 countries. So this graphic is where it shows more the higher density of where those are. 164,000 groups have been described in their experience. And what we're finding is, to cut to the chase, that people who are generating net positive value for everybody in their ecosystem, so everything that would be in the green, we're finding them everywhere. So it's not a couple of wealthy countries or wealthy cities and wealthy countries, or where supposedly the smartest people are, rather they're everywhere. And so that leads to a different idea of maybe if we're looking for what does excellence look like within our own culture, people who've already figured out locally, maybe they're already everywhere. And the question becomes, how do you find them? So we're starting to see that there's similar kinds of questions of what's being found, but the specifics in their local context are super critical and important. So, and I mentioned that we have one big field study. We're in we just finished our second wave of data gathering with commitment to semi-annual waves from now on. So this is 20,000 employees, 4 million customers across 510 offices. So it starts to allow us to see, are there offices that do this better than worse? So the leadership for Flourishing, are they better or worse at this? And here's the key finding, and with this, I'll basically summarize and come to a conclusion, is we are starting to find, with the statistical data that's now in a few papers that we are putting out in chapters, so that will be all published hopefully relatively soon. But we are finding that the culture of leaders, meaning that they hold flourishing as critical, they hold love as the principle, they hold human beings as central to what they're doing. The higher that is, the stronger that is, the more they describe their own flourishing as leaders, and that their offices are generating greater output. So we're starting to connect, not only do you hold a culture, but you experience greater flourishing and you are more productive in doing that. Because, or the opposite, that when you don't hold people as the center of what you're doing out of love, then you experience less flourishing and you've extinguished a lot of the capacity to generate greater productivity within your work. But that also then influences the culture of the people in their office, the experience of flourishing of those employees and their outputs. And we now have the data to be able to show, and that affects their clients as well. So in those 500 offices, they have 4 million customers. So we can now tie or start to understand with the flourishing that the employees who interact with them have. How does that influence the culture of the groups that are working with those employees of clients and their experience of flourishing and the outputs that they're able to generate? So the grand thing is that maybe leadership for flourishing does lead to greater total value generated. And can we start to prove that? So to summarize all that in fairly brute terms is, when you see human beings as replaceable machine parts, what we are discovering and have the data to start substantiating is you're going to end up with a net negative system. So the net value the total value generated is net negative, meaning there's a lot more in red than in green, because the energy loss is huge. You've disengaged a whole bunch of people and the costs and inequities are very, very high. So if you start with that no towards humanity, towards love, as was described, the net value that you're going to generate is negative. Versus if you start with human beings, with what we call homo lumens, or beings of light, and seeing the creativity and inviting that in out of love, then we find that the result is net positive. So very simply, no matter how hard you try, when you're coming from seeing people as machine parts to do a specific job, no matter how much you try to add flavor to that, the net result is always net negative. It's extractive, no matter how hard you try. And what we're finding and starting to have evidence to support is, if you start from seeing a human being and you're interacting out of love every day with those human beings, no matter how much you fall asleep to that, the results are net positive. So you could do that far better, but they're net positive across the whole ecosystem when you start from that principle. Who's taking this up to show you that it's not one weird group? These are a few of the groups that we're working with on this across the world, very different kinds of groups, government, civil society, businesses, small, big, and a variety of countries. So it's just to say, this isn't a brand new idea, and there are a lot of people that are saying we're going to take up this. And then actually in 2 hours, I'm going to be giving a talk on this through the Mexican Stock Exchange to a certification of chief sustainability officers. And this is the 4th cohort going through this, 150 newly minted CSOs of companies like Santander Bank, of Amazon, so the big companies, and being done through the Mexican Stock Exchange, Viva. And they're saying yes to it, and they're being certified in this kind of framing. Joining us for what's coming. So as was mentioned earlier, is Leadership for Flourishing. Exciting things are happening. As we met in May last year, somebody a colleague said, hey, well, why don't we propose the follow-up to the Sustainable Development Goals be the Global Flourishing Goals? And Katy and Matt and others and I looked at each other and said, I have no idea how to do anything like that at the UN. And he said, well, I happen to, because I work in the UN. And so Raja, our colleague, asked us to help prepare, and many on this call worked on that for quite a bit of time to come up with a technical document to describe what the global flourishing goals and principles and guiding ideas would be, and came up with that principle. And within a couple months, Raja was able to get UNESCO to support it. And in May of this year, and with a few people that are on this call were there, we're able to launch the idea into the world of the global flourishing goals based on principles out of Leadership for Flourishing. So it exists in the world, and the next step might be to create this International Day of Human Flourishing. And we've already got a resolution set up and in process to get that proposed by a couple nations and put forward to organize civil society globally around human flourishing. The Leadership for Flourishing book that Katy mentioned has been contracted by Oxford University Press, and we're in the process of doing that. The total value generated, a whole bunch of organizations that we're working with on a Green Gnome hackathon. Many are also in this group. I'm looking at how do they measure total value generated. And we also will be publishing very soon the World Agreements for Ecosystem-Wide Flourishing report, describing a lot of this data that we've found. And that's in combination. There's so much happening here, and that's so exciting. The Global Flourishing study that Katy mentioned with Harvard, Baylor, and Gallup, and some on this call, where we are leading different teams exploring that data across 240,000 people in 22 countries every year for 5 years, and looking at specific questions of what are some of the drivers or the determinants of flourishing, and work that we're doing at the Center for Work Health and Wellbeing at Harvard's THCN School of Public Health, looking at how does this influence worker health and enterprise outcomes in thriving at work. So there's a whole bunch of stuff, and we invite you to join with us at leadershipforflourishing.com, or you can find out more about some of these projects I've mentioned at isclarity.org, or find us through the Harvard Flourishing Program or the Center for Work Health and Wellbeing. So a whole bunch of really exciting stuff is happening, and we're getting data to prove it. So that was a fire hose, so thank you, and I'm glad to share any more with folks.
Oh, that was an unbelievably inspiring fire hose, Jim, and it's so encouraging and inspiring to get that reminder of how much is going on and how much people really do care about this, and quite how much data there is supporting this idea as well. Because what we're so encouraged by is you don't even have to give up profits. I mean, you don't have to have a company that's going to fail on profits but be super lovely to everyone and have everyone flourishing, because the two are mutually supportive. So yeah, it's just so encouraging that we can live the lives that we want to live. We can really be loving, be deeply caring, really see people as homo lumens, and we're not giving anything up, we're just gaining. It's a real gift and such an encouragement. And yeah, the quality of your work, Jim, is out of this world. So yeah, couldn't be more thrilled to be working with you.
Thank you very much. I think the one thing I'd add to that very briefly is what a lot of executive or leaders are asking of us in Leadership for Flourishing is I have two stories now. I have the anecdotal experience of people flourishing because I love them and what we're doing within our organization and outside. And I have hard numbers that I'm being held to. And if I don't, and he said, can you help me take two separate narratives that aren't trade-offs and put them into one, right? So that it's one story, and we do really well in doing that. But as long as there are two stories and we're being forced to make trade-offs for them, and that's not the way to do this. So how do we combine those into one story?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jim. And we're going to zip from the meta, huge scale, right down to some profound social action taken by youth, some young people. And I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome my amazing co-founder of Global Social Leaders, John, who has suffered working with me for what, 12 years now, John? Hugely patient, which is amazing. But yeah, really delighted that John and Simon, who led an extraordinary team of young people in Lima, Peru, on a fabulous project, again, to talk to us. And I think someone was asking about your TED Talk, John. So if you wouldn't mind putting the link to that, it's a really super TED Talk. into the chat, that would be amazing. But over to you, John and Simon. Massive thanks for being here.
Thank you, Katie, and so great to be here and be with you all, and to hear Jim share. Jim's been helping us think about how we measure our sort of broader impact, and Cath always inspires me because I used to be a rower, so that was my sport at school, and I found rowing sort of immensely, I suppose, helpful in terms of how I flourished alongside my academics, going out on the river and being there. So today I'm going to be talking about global social leaders. And as can I just get a thumbs up that my screen is showing? Great, thank you, Katie. And I'm so pleased to have Simon here, because Simon is one of our wonderful GSL lead teachers who's been delivering global social leaders in the field. And Katie, as you heard, is the co-founder of Global Social Leaders. And I suppose just to take a step back, it's a program that we co-founded when a teacher from Singapore said to Katie and I, could you run a leadership program for our students? And we said we could. And I think probably what they were looking for was a leadership as a title program, a leadership program that would prepare them for the UCAS and university. What we said back to them was, could we do a course where we opened it up to other young people from around the world so that they get different perspectives? And can the focus be on social leadership? So that's where the name came from, with Global Social Leaders, that we ran a 2-week summit at Wellington College in the UK, had young people from Singapore and around the world come to the UK. And the focus on the first week was young people learning how to lead themselves. And then in the second week, learning how to lead others by implementing and planning a social action project where they would solve a community and a social issue. And today I was just going to share a story of like one of the projects that really inspires me, and invited Simon here because he's led a fantastic project in Peru and now has moved schools but stayed with Global Social Leaders, and is launching Global Social Leaders shortly in his new school, which is fantastic. Can you hear the sound okay? Can I just get a thumbs up if it's good? Cool. Okay, so you've heard who I am. But I suppose today I'm the CEO of Future Foundations, and then Global Social Leaders is our flagship initiative that we've launched. And I'm also working on a new initiative called Canteen, which focuses on an after-school food program. And I just mentioned that because Jim is helping us look at how would after-school food help society flourish, which has been quite exciting to kind of look at and explore with Jim. So a big thank you to Jim for helping us with that. So just back to GSL and going to that big picture. Since we started, Katie, it's 10 years ago, we did our first program for GSL in 2013. So it has definitely been a resilience project where we've adapted from a 2-week summit to turning it into a movement of schools that become members of Global Social Leaders. And then we train the teachers to support the young people to do projects. And we see that social action and doing projects is a really great way to help young people flourish. And that's because a lot of eco-anxiety is what people are seeing in schools, a lot of focus on exams. If we get young people thinking about the issues they care about, learning that they can take action on those, and then supporting and equipping them to do so, then they learn that when you see problems in the world, there is something we can do about that. And we think that gives a lot of hope for them and for the future. And in so doing, also prepares them for the future where they're going to need to sort of take on that role of solving challenges. So we think it has a sort of double benefit, that it actually helps them now, and then it helps them see where their education is going by doing real world projects, project-based learning. It makes education purposeful and fun and interesting, and that's what we're trying to do. The pictures shown here are photos from actual projects delivered by young people around the world, and then we ask them to submit to us their projects, and then we showcase their projects and we publish them on our website, and then we celebrate all the young people and their projects each year. And this is just our vision, and this is, I suppose, Katie mentioned my TEDx. The title is "Can Young People Change the World?" And I say, yeah. but they shouldn't do it alone. They need to be supported, and that's what I think is really important for creating a flourishing society, that we don't say young people now need to solve all the problems we're creating. We should be thinking about what is our role, what is teachers' roles, what is schools' roles, what's businesses' role in supporting young people now, and then holding them to account to do that. So that's what we're trying to do, is bring together a community of government, businesses, schools, and giving that expertise to support young people so that they can be leaders in their lives and society. And I've just got a picture here from a project, and this is a project run by a group of students in Jordan who said that they wanted to raise $20,000 to buy a bus to create a library that would travel around refugee camps in Jordan. And they submitted that idea to us. We read that project idea and we wrote back to them, said that's extraordinary, amazing. But what happens if that project doesn't work? What's your plan B? And they submitted their project later in the year and told us actually they raised $5,000, and probably they would have given up at that point. But because of the feedback that we'd given them, they then decided to come up with a plan B, which was to find a space next to one refugee camp, which they turned into this library that you can see. And they created a safe space and a library for young people. And I suppose that's my sort of important part of, like, how do young people flourish or sort of get that deep learning, that actually success isn't necessarily achieving your goal, and the importance of pivoting. And there is no pass fail in the real world. It's all a journey, and you try and achieve something and try and get somewhere, and often you then have to rethink what you do, and that's what we think they can learn through doing these projects. So that's my first one. I'm now going to pass over to Simon to share his story and his from being, I suppose, in schools teaching young people to do this. And I think he's going to want me to start with a video, so I'm going to stop sharing and get that ready. Simon, did you want to say anything, or do you want me to just play the video to get people mindfully ready?
Yeah, we can go straight to the video, and then we're going to go
straight to the video. So I'm going to do a new share, hopefully with sound. So just check my my skills here. So if you're ready, hopefully that's there, and then I'll press play. And just to say, I believe it's not in English, but I think you'll get the picture and you understand it. I think sometimes by it not being English, you can take away more.
I don't know if we don't have any sound.
Yeah, sorry, no sound at the moment, but beautiful images.
I definitely press share sound. So let me just stop share. I will try one more time. Otherwise, I think it will be Simon that will bring the sound and I'm pressing computer audio. So that should do it. Let's just see if that works.
Para nosotros ayuda significa formar ese vínculo y hacer lo que se tenga que hacer. Hemos estado cargando piedras, hemos estado cargando palos, pero lo hacemos más que felices porque eso es ayudar, es identificar una necesidad, podemos ver directamente.
Sorry, Katy. Are we okay? I'm going to pass over to Simon.
Not the sound, but not the image. So we've got two. We've got to put them together. We're nearly there. Nearly there.
Okay, so stop. Yeah.
In which case, I guess I'll just go straight into it. I mean, often an image speaks 1,000 words, but in this case, obviously 1,000 words will have to suffice for an image. Hopefully you did get something of a taste of what this is all about. But first of all, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here and just speak very briefly alongside John. This has been a very positive meeting. And I don't want to take us away from that positive sort of vibe, but I do want people to cast their mind back to the dark days of the pandemic, And I'm sure each of us remembers the situation that we were living through, each of us probably in different places, facing different personal challenges, etc. I was living in Peru. Peru was one of the first countries to go into lockdown and one of the last to come out of lockdown. And like many other developing nations around the world, the response to the pandemic was, well, not just like developing nations, like many nations, was, shall we say, interesting. We'll leave it at that. And there were a lot of policies which made life very, very challenging. And as an educator, I was thrown into that. I saw firsthand the impact that was having on my students, on their well-being and their ability to flourish. And in the midst of kind of those challenges is where GSL came into my purview. And I mean, it's difficult to underestimate the kind of the sense of dread, and I would say even nihilism, which was kind of fomenting amongst young people at this time. Their world had been turned upside down. And we have to remember that, you know, they're still developing. And if it was challenging for us, it was even more challenging for them. They found that everything that they had once taken for granted was gone. And all of a sudden, you know, there's no meaning, there's no purpose. So in the sense of that, it was kind of important to try to find a way to empower them, to help them to feel that they can take action, contribute, do something meaningful. And that's where GSL came in. So I, like many teachers across the world, got in contact with the team, found out what it was about, and then opened up the opportunity to my students. And I had a number of teams who all got involved. And they came up with a variety of different ideas, etc. But there was one team that really stood out. And as you saw in the video, what they did was they went out to what are known as the cerros around the edges of Lima, which are where basically there are large shanty towns stretching as far as the eye can see. Most of these places don't have access to running water. And for anybody who's been in Lima, you'll know that at certain, well, for 6 months of the year, there's basically a fog which hangs over the whole of the city coming off the coast. So my team saw this need to provide clean water for these people. They didn't have access to clean water. The only water that they could get was brought by tankers, which would cost them 4 or 5 times as much as it would cost for people who were connected to the main supply. And they linked up with an NGO and they started to think about an idea of installing fog catchers to trap the rainwater and convert it into drinking water and also irrigation water for crops. And they met up with the communities and they had links with them, and they began to develop how they were actually going to create these. And in the midst of lockdown, we actually had whole teams of, I think there was at one point, say 70 students knitting these nets together, socially distanced with masks on. And then they linked up with the communities, developed relationships with them, and they went and installed them in these communities. And that project began, and they installed, I think it was 2 or 3. And then word got out and more communities wanted these things. And 4 years later, it continues. And the next generation are now continuing this project. It's become kind of like a integrated part of what the school does in its outreach, helping students to develop those leadership skills, which helps them to flourish as individuals and to understand that they need to feel part of something bigger than themselves, to have that sense of meaning and purpose. And I'm quite aware that the time's almost 9 o'clock and we're finishing at 9, but I just wanted to link that. Jim was mentioning something in that wonderful research about kind of how this research, you know, how do we overcome, or how do we start to then have a dialogue about, you know, all of this research which shows that flourishing and having meaning and purpose is so important, and the need to kind of meet metrics. And I think that's where the work that John's doing, the work of organizations like Global Social Leaders comes into play, because if we can instill amongst young people an understanding that it is not a trade-off, that in fact, the research, quantitative and qualitative research, demonstrates that actually working together and working a flourishing model actually is going to not only make everybody feel much better in what they do, but that will actually also go hand in hand with increasing whatever metrics you use to decide if you're successful or not. And I think that's where education comes in. That is actually still quite a radical idea. And that's where we as educators have to start to instill via these type of projects in young people, so that they can go ahead and actually become leaders of tomorrow who are agents of change and are able to really integrate flourishing into how they operate the companies of the future and meeting the challenges of the future. So no, I think that's really, you know, everything I want to say today. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you so much, Cath, and thank you so much, Emmie. What an absolutely incredible hour. I know John's got another video, so John, if you want to post the link, the chat will be shared afterwards, but we've got to be super respectful of everyone's time, and just a massive thank you to all of you. Huge joy to see you all today, and yeah, feel very privileged to be part of this group. Emmie, do you want to say anything more?
No, just goodbye, everyone. Can't wait to see you all next month.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Go flourish well. Bye.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye
Bye.
bye. Bye bye. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
The chat.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, John. Thank you, Simon.
No, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Great
Yeah.
to see you.
I love that
See
video.
you-
I'm going to
see
watch
you
it
guys
again and
soon.
again, Simon. It's so
Yeah.
beautiful.
And I put a link to the video in the chat as well. So sorry, my sound like that.
Amazing.
Yeah. It's all of this is starting to seed a few ideas. I'm about to embark on an MA, and I've got, as part of that, I've got to do some research. I'm thinking it's going to be something to do with leadership and flourishing, and how kind of social engagement work can be a tool for instilling those virtues in young people, and how that links to kind of the idea of a meaningful existence. I've got a few ideas kind of bubbling away in the back of my head now.
So glad. So glad.
We better let you close the room, Katy. But thank you so much, Simon, and lovely to see you.
Cheerio, everybody. Take care. Thank you so much. Take it. Take
Have a good rest of your evening. Bye.
Bye.
Katy, I'll try and upload the video. Hopefully I can't hear you.
I think I've done the chat. I'm just going to email it. Thank you so much. Amazing. Oh gosh, that was so good. I felt really bad at the end, but you have to be like,
got to be tight with people. Yeah, you do.
Yeah. I was like, please stop talking, Simon. But particularly as I'm an audience member.
I was like, do try and save the video too. We both try and save it just to make sure we don't lose it. But I'll upload it, and if I have any trouble, I'll ring you. Bye.
That was incredible. Thanks so much. Too good. Hey, Liz, love. Bye.